in Beirut as ceasefire holds. Busy day coming up for Schultz. Report awaited on Donovan. Astronauts get an early start aboard Columbia. Good morning. This is Dallas Townsend with the CBS World News Roundup. Mattingly and Henry Hartsfield aren't following the script. Reed Collins reports from the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
Mattingly and Hartsfield stayed up past their planned bedtime last night, tinkering with the secret Pentagon package on the spacecraft. This morning, they were up early, the subject still on their minds.
Just out of curiosity, did you guys get any of our summary last night?
That's affirmative.
Okay, I'm just curious if that technique worked.
And worked very well, and a lot of interest in your comments.
9 student experimenters are anxious today. Their projects aboard the so-called Getaway Special Canister were not activated yesterday, and the astronauts will try a new procedure today. Also in work this morning, the electrophoresis experiment to see if proteins can be isolated more efficiently in weightlessness, and the setting up of a camera to study storms and lightning from high overhead. A busy day underway. Reed Collins, CBS News at the Johnson Space Center.
Mattingly and Henry Hartsfield are well into their first full workday in space now. So far, things are going very well for the Space Shuttle Columbia. KTRH's Wayne Dolcefino is at the Johnson Space Center following the progress of the flight, and he will have a live report coming up on the 7:30 news in a matter of a few minutes or so.
Mattingly and Hartsfield are well into day 2 of their 7-day shuttle mission already. Here's an update from KTRH's Wayne Dolcefino at Johnson Space Center.
That was the way the day started for the crew of Columbia, a 4 in the morning wake-up call from Mission Control. There hasn't been much to talk about so far, except for some conversation from Commander Mattingly about particles seen flying along with the shuttle.
Yesterday afternoon, after we got in orbit and looked over the payload bay, it looked like back where I think we can see the center engine, the main engine, and it looked like it had some fuzz on it. And this morning it looks clean, and if that's really what we're looking at, which is what it looks like, maybe you could say that we've gotten rid of a lot of ice that formed out there.
Still no word from NASA this morning on whether they'll try some sort of deep-sea dive for those rocket boosters, the $50 million tubes that were supposed to float after leaving the shuttle after launch yesterday, but instead sunk 3,500 feet into the ocean. JP?
Yeah, Wayne, I understand they're having some communication problems with that secret Defense Department payload.
Well, they did all day yesterday. In fact, it appears that the astronauts may not understand everything about that secret payload. We were looking at transcripts of the conversation this morning, and several times during the conversations with Sunnyvale, California, astronaut Hartsfield said, "Slow down, guys. You're getting a little ahead of me. What do I do first? A or Papa Bravo, Tango Bravo?" They have all these little code names for these things. Also, for the first time, we had... Normally, we have one person at Mission Control communicating with the astronauts, called a CAPCOM, Capsule Communicator. Well, this time we have 2 communicators, one from here in Johnson and another one in California at Sunnyvale. He's called a PACOM. And apparently there was some communication links problems between Houston, California, and the shuttle. Problems they hope to clear up today.
Wayne, any activities of note coming up for today for the astronauts?
Well, they're going to be using the Canadian arm, the 800-pound arm, to lift a 900-pound contamination monitor that will test contamination around the payload bay. This time they put a liner inside the payload bay, which should give them some reduced contamination. They don't know exactly what's out there and what the shuttle produces as it goes through space. They're also going to be trying to find a lightning storm. They should hang around Texas if they want to do that. But they're going to be trying to see whether or not they can get a good picture of some lightning from space. They're also going to be trying to make some latex spheres, which could be used in medical research later on.
All right. Thanks very much, Wayne Dolcefino. We'll be checking in with you in just a little while. Space Shuttle program is preparing to go into its most important stage of its history. That's the subject of today's commentary from KTRH News Director Garvin Berry.
The glamour stage of the Space Shuttle's history is ending, and that's dangerous for the entire program. This is the final test of the shuttle. After this flight, it will become a workhorse conveyor, taking experiments in industrial and defense projects into space. That's not as exciting and romantic as the early test, when it was still not certain if the rocket would even work. People are unfortunately becoming less interested in the progress of each flight. And that's not very good, because the real value of the shuttle is still to come. That will be when the experiments begin to produce medical breakthroughs that will save lives. and new industrial processes that will create jobs. It will be duller, but very important. It's a period when short-sighted politicians will intensify their efforts to cut back the entire space program. They will get a lot of support from citizens who are becoming bored with the lack of excitement. It's a dangerous period. The space program is the newest frontier in science, and one that will eventually, among many other things, solve our energy problems. It's important not only to us in Houston, but to the entire human race. It will be tragic if we ever let it be stopped. This is Garvin Berry with the KTRH commentary.
CBS News, this is Charles Osgood. Mattingly and Henry Hartsfield were up and about early today in the Space Shuttle Columbia, beginning their first full day of activity in space. Through the day, the two will carry out a number of scientific experiments, including one test that ultimately could lead to the production in space of medicinal drugs.
Columbia moving along very nicely this morning, thank you. No problems to report. And things have been going that way since the launch, for the most part. Wayne Dolcifino is at the Space Center right now and has the latest live updates.
There have been more instructions about the operation of that Defense Department payload from the folks in Sunnyvale, California. And it's becoming more and more clear all the time that the crew on board doesn't know exactly what they're supposed to be doing with it all. And Commander Ken Mattingly is making quite sure that he doesn't make any mistakes. Here's an edited version of some of the strange conversation.
Okay, you're going to have to come back and give me those times again. I got 02315. This is what I remember from the first one. What was the second one?
We'd like you to go ahead and go to override in either case.
In any case, we'll go to override and leave it in the position as commanded to. Is that correct?
Roger.
Say again, please, you're clipped.
Roger, we would like you to go to override if it's either visual or LED.
And just leave it in the position that it happens to physically be in. Is that correct?
And the folks at NASA are quietly smiling about the difficulty the Defense Department seems to be having trouble in communicating with the crew. Later this morning, the Canadian Arm will lift up and wave around a 900-pound package that's supposed to measure any kind of radiation around the payload bay. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcifino, KTRH News.
Columbia serves two masters on this mission, Mission Control in Houston and the Air Force Satellite Control Facility in Sunnyvale, California.
Columbia, this is Sunnyvale. How do you read?
Fine, clear.
The Air Force has asked Mattingly and Hartsfield to operate that secret infrared device twice this morning, with indications something isn't working right.
Okay, and I should be looking for operation during this period, and if I see it successfully, you want me to leave it alone, or you want me to still go to override?
Roger, sir. We'd like you to go ahead and go to override in either case.
Running the Defense Department experiment will take about 14 minutes in these morning sessions. Reed Collins, CBS News at the Johnson Space Center.
STS-4 is doing well on its second day in orbit, wrapping up the series of test flights for the big ship. For one of the astronauts, Henry Hartsfield, it's the realization of a 16-year-long dream. Hartsfield's mother says as she watched the blast-off yesterday, she remembered how long her son had wanted this and cried tears of joy.
Mattingly and Hank Hartsfield are now on the second day of their week-long mission aboard the Columbia Space Shuttle, working on both military and commercial experiments for the first time. Space officials say there is little chance of recovering the shuttle's two rocket boosters that mysteriously sank in more than 3,000 feet of water in the Atlantic Sunday. The boosters are designed to parachute to a sea landing and be picked up for reuse. Officials say replacing them could cost $50 million. A report...
Let us know when you're ready on the TV and we'll give you a go for that. And Columbia, Houston, we're with you again through Milo for about 4.5 minutes. Okay, I'm just waiting for you. Wonder if you're waiting for us. On a 3-ring circus, the thief was called for Henry's watcher in the middle of all this. I've got downlink VCR. Start to run it when you're ready. You have a go, Ken. Our picture is flickering very badly. And I don't know whether what you get does it or not, but it's shaking around, and I know it's not even a recognizable picture on our screen. So, do you have any way of knowing that before we press on? The next thing I do is show you requires some explanation. Okay, we've got a good picture down here, Ken. You do? That's perfect. Okay, well, do is to time it, since I can't see it up here. And for right now, knowing that it's only my playback capability is bad, what you're looking at is a picture of Holmes 4. Actually, we set the cameras up during the Holmes 3 to 4 period. Pretty quick. You got wideband vision continuous, how about PCM? No PCM call, Ken. Just 30 seconds and then back to standby. Okay, Mike. Now I've lost my train of thought on what was on that film. What we're trying to put together was a picture that showed you Holmes 3 preparations and with the valve and the intercom that went up to it. Actually, right after ignition, the camera models, they're good enough to hold up these cameras. They aren't quite in the side of the mass, so trying to burn the camera rotated around. You got a beautiful picture that you can see. That's all before the playback stopped. We'll see if Harry can point the camera when they get a look at the ground over Mexico there. Hey, Mike, is that VCR stopped? I'll switch to live TV. You can take the DFI recorder's wideband vision back to standby. Okay. And then to off, TK. Say it. And now you can take it off, and OEX power off, and wideband mission power off. Okay, they are. I know that some of our tapes still work. I'll go ahead and continue to cut those into That's affirmative, TK.
Columbia, with the exception of dealing with the secret Pentagon payload. KTRH's Doug Miller reports from the Johnson Space Center.
All's quiet on the Space Shuttle Columbia this afternoon. A few minutes ago, we saw our first television pictures from this flight, pictures that were videotaped yesterday. Astronauts Ken Mattingly and Hank Hartsfield offered a very short live tour of the shuttle in orbit. Of course, they avoided showing those secret military experiments. They've had some trouble with that classified Department of Defense cargo. At least one of the experiments apparently has not worked out exactly as planned. Now, that surmise is based on a couple of cryptic words from the crew about a secret experiment. They're also having problems getting some directions, some instructions from the ground on those experiments. They're having to dodge making specific statements about the experiments, though, because, of course, they're supposed to be a secret. The Getaway Special, rented by a private citizen and donated to a university, still is not working, but NASA says it'll keep trying as Columbia continues its fourth and final test mission. Reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, this is Doug Miller, KTRH News. That music comes from the Space Shuttle Columbia, orbiting 161 miles above the Earth, and astronauts Ken Mattingly and Hank Hartsfield have reason to celebrate. They're flying the most trouble-free Space Shuttle mission yet. Early this afternoon, Mattingly reported that even the troublesome tiles above the shuttle's engines are apparently intact.
Well, I have my binoculars out. I was looking at things over the tail end. When
The good news is tempered with some disappointments. The crew still cannot activate the getaway special that the experiment package bought and paid for the Utah State University. And some cryptic chatter about the secret military experiments indicates that at least one of those Department of Defense experiments has not worked out as expected. The crew is now chowing down on what you might call a space version of a Texas-style barbecue. But on the whole, it's going well on the final test mission of the Space Shuttle Columbia. Reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, this is Doug Miller, KPRH News.
And Columbia, Houston, we're 30 seconds to go before a long LOS. We'll talk to you again at Botswana at 5-9. Okay, I see you then.
This is Shuttle Control. Hawaii has loss of signal. Columbia misses the United States during this pass. The descending node of the 21st orbit goes down the Pacific Ocean across South America. Next acquisition through the Botswana station in Africa in 41 minutes. At 1 day, 6 hours, 18 minutes mission elapsed time. This is Shuttle Control, Houston. Minutes, over.
Roger, we read you loud and clear, Hank.
At the NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston. Our next status report is scheduled for 7:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time. This is the NASA Broadcast News Service.
Just let you know where we are. We said we caught up. DK's working on the annual ambulance, and I'm getting that for the water dump to the first.
This is the 4:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time, STS-4 NASA Broadcast News Service report from the NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston. A note to editors follows this status report. The astronauts are about to have dinner as they near the end of their second full day in orbit. They are now in their 21st orbit of the Earth. As the Columbia moves through its 21st orbit, the spacecraft is continuing to show a slight but unexplained torquing motion, which it has evidenced since last night. The torquing motion is characterized by either pitching or rolling, depending on the shuttle's orientation. According to Flight Director Harold John, who addressed the torquing phenomenon at this afternoon's press conference, the degree of motion is larger than that experienced with previous shuttle flights. However, the torquing poses no problems for the mission as, John noted, there is adequate attitude control propellant for stabilizing the spacecraft fully during experimental observation times. John said the torquing motion is most likely attributable to outgassings from shuttle materials. Kennedy Space Center, meanwhile, has reported that the solid rocket boosters, which sank in the Atlantic Ocean following release from the shuttle shortly after launch, have been definitively located in 3,000 feet of water 130 miles east of Cape Canaveral. Kennedy notes that a pair of solid rocket boosters is already on hand at the launch site for the 5th shuttle flight. This is Charles Recknagel at the NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston. Our next status report is scheduled for 7:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time. This is the NASA Broadcast News Service.
Is running a class operation 161 miles in orbit. The crew has been blasting loud music through their spacecraft today. Presumably, Mattingly and Hartsfield will turn that noise down and sack out for the night about 2 hours from now. Reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, this is Doug Miller, KPRH.
Troubleshooting procedure for the getaway special. At 1 day, 7 hours, 54 minutes mission elapsed time. This is Shuttle Control, Houston.
Christopher Glenn has our report tonight on the Columbia mission. Columbia's crew bounded out of bed this morning like they had had their Hershey bars, according to the flight director, eager to get going despite the fact they'd worked 3 hours past bedtime the night before. Not far down their activities list today, they started working again with the secret military payload being carried in the cargo bay. The air-to-ground conversations cryptic and full of instructions like perform Charlie, step 3. Apparently, at least some of the secret stuff didn't work. Commander T.K. Mattingly reported.
According to my understanding, I have 1 more minute of this, and so far we've had no joy.
Later, though, Mattingly did some through-the-windows inspection of the main thrusters, an area where there had been some minor launch damage on the last flight.
Well, I had my binoculars out and was looking at things on the tail end. I went around and looked, and from where I am, it doesn't look like we got even one dig on the old spots. Not even a little scratch. They're just as clean as when they're put on.
In all, it seemed a much more relaxed day for the crew. By dinner time, things on the flight deck were going smoothly, and the tape they decided to put on for dinner music seemed to express their mood. For the first time this flight, they'll work with the big remote-controlled manipulator arm in the cargo bay. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
As John noted, there is adequate attitude control propellant for stabilizing the spacecraft fully during experimental observation times. John said the torque motion is most likely attributable to outgassings from shuttle materials. Kennedy Space Center, meanwhile, has reported that the solid rocket boosters, which sank in the Atlantic Ocean following release from the shuttle shortly after launch, have been definitively located in 3,000 feet of water 130 miles east of Cape Canaveral. Kennedy notes that a pair of solid rocket boosters is already on hand at the launch site for the 5th shuttle flight. This is Charles Recknagel at the NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston. Our next status report is scheduled for 7:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time. This is a NASA broadcast.
Shuttle mission control at 1 day, 8 hours, 54 minutes. Flight Director John Cox and the Ivory team have assumed flight control of STS-4. Capsule communicator during this shift will be astronaut Bob Stewart. We now estimate the time of the change of shift briefing with outgoing Flight Director Chuck Lewis to begin at 7:45 p.m. Central Time. This is Shuttle Mission Control.
CBS News, this is Judy Muller. Officials have solved the mystery of what caused 2 reusable space shuttle rocket boosters to sink into the Atlantic. After a preliminary investigation, NASA blamed the sinking of the boosters on the failure of parachutes to slow their descent, a multi-million-dollar loss. They also raised the possibility that the problem could delay the 5th flight of the Columbia. Meanwhile, the 4th flight continues on a relatively routine course, and the astronauts have called it a day. Christopher Glenn reports.
2 tired astronauts tumbled into bed about a half hour ago, 30 minutes past their scheduled bedtime, but still better than having to work nearly 3 hours late as they did last night. Commander T.K. Mattingly put in a call to the ground as the Columbia came within range of the Hawaii tracking station.
Sorry to say hello and then good night, I'm going to bed, but I guess that's what we better do. I'll talk to you later then.
Just sleep soundly tonight because your ascent team is awake.
The orbit before, Mattingly had scolded the ground for piling too much detail on the crew during the day, which he said was distracting them from accomplishing their major tasks. Tomorrow, pilot Henry Hartsfield will unstow the big remote manipulator arm from its berth in the payload bay and use it to pick up and wave about an instrument which measures electromagnetic interference which builds up around the spaceship in flight. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
11 o'clock.
From ABC News, I'm Paul Altmaier. For the Space Shuttle Columbia, there's been only one real hitch in this mission, and today there was an official explanation of what went wrong with the booster's rockets. And Irv Chapman has the story at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
The space agency's first word on the loss of those expensive rocket engines is that the parachute system malfunctioned, allowing the boosters to hit the water like a ton of bricks, and they sank. The implication is the parachute somehow detached too soon, while the rockets were some distance up. They are now under 3,500 feet of water, 150 miles east of the Kennedy Space Center. It is known exactly where they are. Underwater inspection by remote control television will be used in the investigation of the cause of the malfunction. Though these particular rockets were not to be reused until the 8th flight, it is possible modifications will be needed to the booster design before the very next flight. Irv Chapman, ABC News at the Johnson Space Center, Houston.
From ABC News, I'm Paul Altmaier.
Capital City, KLBJ AM Austin.
Commence arms production talks in Geneva. Moscow unhappy about the space shuttle. Outlook remains uncertain for peace in Lebanon. Good morning. This is Dallas Townsend with the CBS World News Roundup. Final test flight of the Space Shuttle Columbia with Ken Mattingly and Henry Hartsfield aboard. Reed Collins tells us what's going on.
Mattingly and Hartsfield have begun one of their busiest days. Mattingly urging Mission Control to skip the little things and allow them to concentrate on the big ones. Hartsfield grew queasy yesterday, skipped lunch, and took a motion sickness pill and an aspirin. They sounded chipper this morning, though, complaining that they couldn't stomp their feet to the wake-up music NASA played them. Still not operating is the Getaway Special package with 9 student experiments locked inside. They're still troubleshooting that one on the ground. This morning, Hartsfield has had difficulty getting the remote arm into operation and had to get out the malfunction book. The plan is to grab the 800-pound environmental contaminant detector and wave it around the spacecraft on the end of that arm. As Hartsfield struggled, Mission Control encouraged.
It don't look like the picture. That picture's not right, is it?
It's looking good to us.
But pictures of the arm in operation cannot be shown to the public this time. The reason, that secret Defense Department experiment sits in the middle of the cargo bay, and nobody may get a peek at that. Reed Collins, CBS News at the Johnson Space Center.
This is Don McNeil in Moscow. The Communist Party newspaper Pravda says that the 4th test flight of the U.S. Space Shuttle has taken on an ominous meaning. It signifies an end to innocent flights, Pravda says, because military cargo has been placed on board for the first time. The newspaper does not say what that military cargo is. Pravda adds that the decision by the Pentagon to create a special space command by September 1st is another step by the Americans to militarize space. The scripts for space warfare, Pravda says, are now written not in Hollywood, but in the Pentagon. Outer space should serve peace, the newspaper concludes, and cites the Soviet-French mission now in progress as an example. 4 Soviet cosmonauts and French Air Force Colonel Jean-Luc Chrétien have been conducting astrophysical experiments and are studying the effect of weightlessness on the human body. TASS reports that their mission is on schedule and that they are feeling fine. Don McNeil, CBS News, Moscow.
Scientists from all 15 countries engaged in Antarctic research are meeting now in Leningrad. They're discussing cooperation programs and development of Antarctica's mineral resources.
Space Shuttle has apparently been corrected. Details now from KTRH's Wayne Dolcefino live at Johnson Space Center.
Canadarm's metal fingers have clutched the 900-pound contamination package and has been waving it around for about 15 minutes now. The crew triggered alarms this morning when they cranked the arm system up, triggering concern in Mission Control until specialists could figure out a way to fix it. The arm will wave the contamination package around for a while, the most strenuous test yet for the critical part of the orbiter, and it was obvious that Mission Control was happy to give the crew the good news.
Columbia, Houston, data on the capture and rigid eyes looks good from down here. You are go for further operations.
Success with the arm would be a welcome note this morning since the Getaway Special package of experiments isn't working at all, and the Department of Defense payload is reportedly not providing the results the military was looking for. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News.
CBS News.
I do not have any plans to resign. I intend to serve this government as long as Ronald Reagan wants me to serve it, and with pleasure.
A triumphant Raymond Donovan saying this morning he is keeping his job as Labor Secretary. This is Charles Osgood. Today they had a bit of trouble with Columbia's mechanical arm when they turned on the craft's 50-foot cargo boom. Late word from the shuttle is that the problem has apparently been overcome.
Space Center this morning, and we'll give you an update on Columbia coming up in just a few moments. Right now, though, let's pause for the traffic, get a look at the freeways, and here's Joni Green. TRH's Wayne Dolcifino has a report from the Johnson Space Center.
The Getaway special package of biological experiments hasn't worked yet, possibly because of a broken wire in the crew quarters. Flight boss Chuck Lewis, though, isn't giving up.
It'll be coming late, but we're still working that, and very disappointed that that one didn't come online for us.
The gas, as it's called, was organized this time by Utah State University. The students involved are driving to the Space Center here tonight, hoping when they get here they'll have good news. The contamination measuring device, though, is working just fine. It's been waved around in space for about an hour now. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcifino, KTRH News.
The parachutes on the two solid rocket boosters malfunctioned, so instead of softly parachuting into the Atlantic for recovery and reuse, the boosters crashed into the water and sank. Now NASA has appointed an investigative board to figure out what went wrong. NASA spokesman Brad Marmon points out there's a long-shot possibility that this could delay the shuttle's next flight scheduled in November.
Well, the next flight boosters are already in place in the Space Center. The only impact it would have was if they determined there was a generic problem with the SRB recovery system that needed to be modified. If it's just a one-shot deal with these boosters that they don't think would ever happen again, there won't be any impact on it.
Meanwhile, NASA has to figure out whether it's cost-effective to salvage those boosters from 3,500 feet of water, or whether they'll remain a sunken treasure worth $50 million. At the Johnson Space Center, this is Doug Miller, KTRH News.
Mutual News, the mechanical arm aboard Space Shuttle Columbia today is being put through its toughest test. Mutual's Paul Henderson, monitoring the shuttle mission in Washington, reports the test started after the astronauts overcame some mechanical problems.
The purpose of the survey of contamination coming from the shuttle is to try to eliminate as much as possible without jeopardizing the craft. Whatever's still there will provide a baseline for other experiments carried on future missions, so any contamination can be factored out of the experiments. But the most important part of today's study is the effect of the exhaust plumes of the shuttle's small maneuvering rockets. NASA is worried the shock waves and gases from the rockets might have an adverse effect on satellites launched by the shuttle as the shuttle backs away from them using those thrusters.
CBS News, this is Frank Sebastiani. Astronauts used the ship's robot arm today to wave a pollution measuring device. The purpose of the experiment, to find out whether that arm is capable of hoisting satellites into space in future missions. Now this.
In the Gulf Coast, a malfunctioning ceiling fan is responsible for an open... The Columbia Shuttle astronauts, and actually day three also for KTRH's Wayne Dolcifino at the Johnson Space Center. He has this update on the shuttle space mission.
The mechanical arm has been waving around the 900-pound contamination meter, an exercise that will continue throughout the day. Conversations between Mission Control and Space have been scarce today. Flight Director Harold Drawn says that's due to the personality of Commander Mattingly.
He's got him a little calculator on board that he's programmed times into that times out and rings a bell for him when it's time to do the next event and tells him what it is. And he sticks to that thing and won't do anything that takes him away from it. He's just a very regimented person.
One space comment that is drawing interest is the word damn, uttered sometime this morning over the air by pilot Hartsfield, a comment Drawn can't explain.
It was such a short burst. I do remember it was over Australia, but I'm sure it had anything to do with the office.
Not RMS. NASA plans to try to fix the broken Getaway Special series of experiments sometime today. If not, they'll do it tomorrow. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcifino, KTRH News.
South.
Columbia, Houston, back with you for 3.5 minutes. In Columbia, Houston, the entire IECM team is delighted with the events today and want to give you a big thank you for a job well done. I appreciate that very much. We worked awful hard to get it done, but I think it flowed fairly smoothly. Roger.
Control, Houston, 2 days, 3 hours, 29 minutes, mission elapsed time. Just passed out of range of the tracking station during that pass over the continental United States. Crew, during that time period, rebirthed the contamination monitor and its package in the payload, in its position in the payload bay, and have disconnected the arm from the IECM. They're doing a few other activities with the mechanical arm at this time, and we'll power that down shortly. We'll be reacquiring communication with Columbia in about 15 minutes as we approach the Ascension Island tracking station. At 2 days, 3 hours, 30 minutes, mission elapsed time. This is Mission Control, Houston. Columbia, Houston, through Ascension for 4.5 minutes. Over.
Okay, we're working along at step 7 now. We've tried it once, no joy, and we're kind of assessing the situation.
Roger, recap. Columbia, Houston, we're 30 seconds, LOS. Osman is next at 3 plus 55.
Okay.
Mission Control, Houston, passing out of range of the Ascension Island tracking station. We'll be reacquiring communication with Columbia in about 5 minutes over Botswana. 2 days, 3 hours, 50 minutes, mission elapsed time. This is Mission Control, Houston. Houston, 2 days, 3 hours, 55 minutes, mission elapsed time, standing by for acquisition of signal over Botswana. Botswana for 7.
Okay, we've gone through step 7 a couple of times, and we ended up going through 8, 9. We're working on 10 now.
Roger, we copy.
And we had no success.
Understand.
CBS News, this is Frank Sebapani. The astronauts flexed the muscles on Columbia's mechanical arm today. Christopher Glenn reports from the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
After a slow start getting the remote manipulator arm up and running this morning, ground control is now saying they couldn't be more pleased with the way today's tests of the system went. Pilot Henry Hartsfield, frustrated by problems getting the arm's grappling mechanism to latch properly, let slip a mild oath over the air-to-ground radio link, but then managed to snag and lift an 800-pound desk-sized unit packed with 11 contamination monitoring instruments. He used the arm to swing the monitor into various positions around the cargo bay to check the pollutant buildup which occurs when the shuttle's small thruster jets are fired. Now the contamination monitor has been re-stowed, ending the major scientific activity of the day. Later, the Columbia will be turned so that its tail is toward the sun, holding that position for nearly 3 days to test the effects of the extreme heat and cold of space on opposite sides of the ship. Some exercise, a meal, and lots of housekeeping chores round out the day. Then an earlier bedtime than usual is scheduled for the crew. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
From ABC News, I'm Bob Schmidt.
His reusable booster rockets will stay on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. That decision from NASA officials today, along with a policy on private onboard experiments which don't work. KTRH's Doug Miller reports from the Johnson Space Center.
Well, today has been the busiest day yet for the astronauts aboard Columbia. The men have spent much of their time fighting their machines. The flexible arm in the shuttle's payload bay wouldn't wave automatically, so astronauts Ken Mattingly and Hank Hartsfield had to flex that arm manually. That cost them about 40 minutes in an already tight schedule. But back on the ground, there were a couple of important decisions from NASA. The space agencies decided not to retrieve those two $25 million boosters lost in the Atlantic after Sunday's launch. Some newly obtained data reveals that the solid rocket boosters plummeted into the ocean at a speed of 500 feet per second. That indicates the parachutes failed to open. Navy cameras will now take pictures of the boosters. They hope to figure out what caused the mishap and whether some possible design flaws might delay the shuttle's next flight in November. Meanwhile, the Getaway Special still is not working. And now NASA spokesman Brad Marmon says the space agency has decided on a policy about rented payloads that don't work.
Our policy is that if the orbiter does not reach the altitude for the mission, or for some other reason that's not the user's fault, the payload doesn't activate and commence its operations, we will refly a payload of the Getaway Special at the earliest opportunity.
In this case, Utah State University will get a free ride on the next flight of the space shuttle. So the Getaway Special will fly again, but the reusable boosters will not. The astronauts are now eating their supper, preparing for some housekeeping chores, and preparing for their third night's sleep aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia. Reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, this is Doug Miller, KTRH News.
Of course, would be invited for the crew return and the Challenger arrival. The public should be advised that only the main gate at Ellington would be open.
Mattingly and Hartsfield are to land in California on Sunday morning. They are expected to arrive back at Ellington late Sunday afternoon.
Mission Control, Houston, 2 days, 6 hours, 20 minutes mission elapsed time. Ground controllers and mission control and thermal experts have studied indications that they're getting from the spacecraft as to the possible continued presence of water on the underside tiles, and have decided to go to a bottom sun attitude again tonight to be sure that they have baked all the water out of the tiles to avoid any possible problems on entry. That message will probably be relayed up to the crew on this pass or perhaps the next one. That attitude will be held during the night. We're currently over the Hawaii tracking station at this time. 2 days, 6 hours, 21 minutes mission elapsed time. This is Mission Control, Houston.
Columbia, Houston, 3 minutes left this pass. Got a long LOS coming up. I've got one comment to get up to you. Over.
Go ahead.
Roger, TK. We just got some information on the ground. We're seeing some anomalous readings in our DFI that lead us to believe that we may not have gotten all the water baked out of the tiles on the bottom of the orbiter. So we'll be planning on going to the bottom sun attitude tonight, and we'll get that attitude up to you in the next pass.
Okay, that the venting kind of stop? Or you got some temperature data you're looking at?
Roger, TK, it's temperature data we're looking at.
Okay, well, we'll be here.
CBS News, this is David Jackson. A shuttle's remote-controlled cargo arm put astronauts Mattingly and Hartsfield behind schedule for a while, but NASA officials say they've been working like gangbusters and are once again back on the timeline. They did more work with that super-secret military payload today, but as usual, no one is saying what they did or how or why. Only minor movement on Wall Street today. The Dow Industrial's up 0.28 at 812.21. Big board volume 47 million shares.
fly again, but the boosters lost at sea will not. Those decisions this afternoon on the so far busiest day of the fourth flight in the Space Shuttle Columbia. KTRH's Doug Miller reports from the Johnson Space Center.
Well, the astronauts lost about 45 minutes in their already tight schedule today when they had problems with the shuttle's maneuvering arm. They also ran into more secret disappointments from their classified Pentagon payload. And the getaway special still does not work. That problem with the experiment package that was blasted into space for $10,000 rent has this afternoon prompted a new policy explained by NASA's Brad Marmon.
The Getaway Special Reflight policy is that we will guarantee a reflight of the user's payload at no additional charge for standard services if, through no fault of the person using it, the mission either doesn't get to its orbit or the payload fails to activate and payload operations can't commence.
Well, that means that Utah State University will get a free ride on Columbia's next flight, but that flight could be delayed by those two boosters that crashed into the ocean after Sunday's launch. NASA's decided not to raise those sunken boosters, but the agency will use Navy underwater cameras to figure out exactly what went wrong. NASA's still not sure whether the water trapped in Columbia's tiles during launch has completely evaporated, so the astronauts this afternoon will turn their shuttle belly up toward the sun. They'll leave Columbia in that position when they begin their sleep period about an hour from now. Reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, this is Doug Miller, KTRH News.
This is The World Tonight. Good evening. I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News. The day of the shuttle Columbia's flight in space has not been without its problems, but Mattingly and Hartsfield are doing fine, thank you. Christopher Glenn has their story.
Astronauts Mattingly and Hartsfield, both Auburn University graduates, came awake this morning to the strains of the school's fight song. After breakfast, Columbia pilot Hartsfield moved to the station from which he operates the 50-foot-long arm in the payload bay. It has a snare-like wire contraption on the far end with which to pick things up, and it wasn't long before it became obvious that the device wasn't catching. Hartsfield surprised everyone by letting his frustration slip through on the air-to-ground.
Damn!
At a briefing later on, Flight Director Harold Drawn was asked about the expletive.
Hank is a good old boy.
Drawn explained seriously that the arm is a difficult thing to test on Earth, where gravity prevents it from supporting even its own weight.
A certain amount of that testing, the detailed testing and ring out of that system is going to have to be done on orbit. So it's not surprising that you might see some small characteristics that you wouldn't anticipate.
Eventually, the glitch was fixed, and several hours were spent hoisting a package of monitoring instruments to various spots around the ship to check on the buildup of pollutants after firing small thruster jets. Bedtime for the crew tonight is an hour earlier than last night. Tomorrow, more science, and maybe more than was heard today about that secret military payload on board. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
From ABC News, I'm Bob Schmidt.
CBS News, this is David Jackson. And Mattingly and Hartsfield are supposed to be asleep aboard the orbiting Columbia shuttle now. Officials say they'll probably sleep well tonight. They say the two worked like gangbusters all day long, trying to catch up with a heavy workload and solving problems with that remote control space arm. The astronauts will be flying upside down tonight to give the underside heat-shielding tiles extra time exposed to the sun. There may be some dampness there left over from a weekend storm at Cape Canaveral. NASA wants to make sure that those troublesome tiles are baked completely dry before re-entry. David Jackson, CBS News.
Substantive discussions commence in START talks. Optimism in Beirut. Berkeley adopts handgun law. Anniversary for Space Shuttle astronaut. Good morning. This is Dallas Townsend with the CBS World News Roundup. The Hartsfield have commenced another active day aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia. Reed Collins reports from the Johnson Space Center.
A little march music began the day for Mattingly and Hartsfield, similar to that Hartsfield used to play to get his family going on Saturdays. Mrs. Hartsfield noted they've been married 25 years today.
Good morning. Happy anniversary. I love you.
And Henry Hartsfield sent her a message through Mission Control.
How about passing my love to my family, and that's my wife who wants to try for 25 more.
But the biggest of all, they got the students' experiment package, the Getaway Special, the gas, working. They used a rewiring scheme worked out for them on the ground.
Houston, Columbia. It sounds to me like we owe somebody down there a great big cheer. Your little fix for the first try on fixing up the gas, and we got relay 02 and 00 shifted from latent to hot.
Well, that's really great news. You're going to make a lot of folks happy down here. Thank you.
That was a very clean scheme.
And so a victory for 9 Utah State University students kept on tenterhooks, wondering if their experiments ever would work, getting yes for an answer this morning. Reed Collins, CBS News at the Johnson Space Center.
Who made the trek to Johnson Space Center? KTRH's Wayne Dolcefino explains.
The outlook for the Getaway Special experiment looked rather grim yesterday, but this morning, Commander Mattingly brought some good news from space when he announced that a little procedure they tried worked and the gas was now working. With me are Gilbert Moore, an adjunct professor of physics at Utah State. He was the man who sponsored and purchased this payload, this Getaway Special. First of all, got to be great news, Mr. Moore, to get it working.
Absolutely, incredibly, fantastically wonderful, neat.
The students, as you said, have been driving around the country. They went to Marshall Space Center. They came here to Johnson Space Center. They were obviously a little bit concerned yesterday, but that must be good news for them, too.
It's excellent news. They had taken it well. They are adults, and they had made a peace with it, but boy, is it better when it works.
Tell us briefly, in general, what these experiments are intended to do.
There are 2 sets of experiments. I won't describe the individual ones, but 2 sets. Some devoted to materials processing in space. How do you make metals differently or better? How do you do soldering? Will soldering be effective in zero gravity? How do you make better composite materials up there? The other group are life sciences experiments. What will be the effect on living organisms of birth, generation after generation in space? Those are the 2 different groups of experiments, and there are 10 altogether.
The students are going to be traveling westward in the next few days. They're going to be there for the landing, hopefully this Sunday at Edwards Air Force Base. And again, congratulations on the experiment, sir. It was really the only bad note so far on the flight that the gas hadn't worked. Everything else had been going so well. Now that we have this, flight number 4 looking better and better all the time. Live from the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News.
Better and better all the time, and one of the few problems to crop up since that Sunday launch has apparently been solved. KTRH's Wayne Dolcefino has the story from the Johnson Space Center.
We owe somebody down there a great big cheer.
The reason the Columbia crew had fixed the Getaway Special experiment broken since launch. Good news for the Utah State University students who placed the project on board. Tests on things like algae, duckweed, and brine shrimp may not seem important, but sponsor Gil Moore tells KTRH they could play a big role in America's space future.
Algae will be very useful as an oxygen source in the space station era. When you don't want to put a lot of consumables upstairs, you want to recycle your oxygen supply. The algae will then be eaten by brine shrimp, and the brine shrimp can be eaten by the astronauts, and the algae can eat the solid waste from the astronauts. It's a closed life cycle system that we're working on. Even though they're simple, they're useful.
Day 4 in space will be a light one for Mattingly and Hartsfield, a chance to catch their breath after yesterday's marathon on tests. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News.
Hawaii for a minute and a half.
As it begins its 47th orbit of Earth, Columbia continues in its bottom-to-sun mode.
Columbia, Houston, see over the state set 37.
9 experiments, including...
This is Shuttle Control. Hawaii has loss of signal. Next station is Buckhorn in 5.5 minutes. Buckhorn will be followed by Merritt Island. We expect television through Merritt Island. At 2 days, 22 hours, 32 minutes mission elapsed time. This is Shuttle Control, Houston.
Columbia, Houston, through the state shore, about 19 minutes.
Okay, got you loud and clear. When do you want to start the TV?
That'll be over a mile, Hank.
How far is that?
Okay, Mila comes up at 44 past the hour.
Okay.
And Henry, if you're going to do that, okay, we have a request. You tell us which cameras you're going to use, and once you get them set up, if you would go to TV Power Control Command on A7, then we can adjust the intensity and the light and everything.
That's what I'm supposed to be doing.
Well, we thought we'd try and offload you a little bit, TK.
You don't know where I'm going next.
Okay.
I think we can get more hands in the pie than we got works for or something like that.
Okay, TK, it's your show. And Columbia, before we get started on that, we have one switch on panel A11.
R1 on A11?
Yes, sir. O2, tank 4 heaters, Bravo to auto.
O2, tank 4, Bravo heater is auto.
Thank you, sir. Mila is locked up and we're ready anytime you are.
Okay, and right now I'm trying to get you out in the overhead window. These are the flight deck camera.
Okay.
Have command and enable. Taking a look at now is should be coming up on the Gulf Coast. Let me know when you have a picture.
Okay, we don't have anything yet. And TK, can you tell us which camera you're using?
This is the flight deck camera.
Okay, we have a picture now.
Okay, the picture I'm trying to show you now is looking back at the Gulf Coast. You can look out at the horizon, you can see the Earth's limb and a lot of light cloud patterns. And as you come down, and we're going to track right along the Gulf Coast here. You can see some clouds in. I don't know how much resolution you have on those clouds.
We can see them quite well, TK.
Well, point to one. Let me know if you can see it. There's a distinct cloud buildup.
Yes, we can see all that.
Okay, those are some fairly large clouds that are showing up there. And those are typical of what you see in this area. The Gulf Coast, I'm not sure there's enough color contrast for it to stand out. We're seeing mostly small clouds that are down along the water. They're low bulky Q. I mentioned they're probably not too large. Unfortunately, this is a path going backwards, so I'm having to tell you where we've been. I'm looking down from the mud silts that I'm beginning to see in the bottom of the picture here.
Right, we see those?
That should be about the area coming out of the Mississippi. And there's some little crescent islands there that you can recognize that ought to be off the coast of Mobile.
Okay.
And you should be able to see some of the coastal features as it swings along here. Is the contrast good enough to pick up the coast, or am I wasting your time?
No, we can see it.
Okay, on the monitor it's not all that swift. Coming up on an area now that looks like it ought to be down around the Florida coast there. And we should be starting to move inland, I guess, as that last little arc looks like the England Tyndall area. And we should be sweeping back across where we can see something. As a matter of fact, I'm looking down now, and you should be able to see that's Tampa. A lot of clouds in the area. There's Tampa Bay.
We have it.
Okay, and we should be, sorry to back into this, but the next thing we should see will be working our way over to the Cape. We did this the other attitude. We had a view looking forward. It was rather spectacular. Okay, down the bottom of your picture now.
It's right in the middle of our picture, TK. It looks great.
Yes, sir. That's a familiar sight. I don't know if you can see the SLF on your monitor. It just stands out like it was painted with a big arrow from here. And we'll sweep over, and you can pick up things like Lake Okeechobee.
Yeah, I think we can see the SLF.
Okay. And then we sweep down to Florida, and you can pick up the whole area with Miami and all of the land to the south. And you can walk down the Keys, you can see the colors. And in just a minute, I'll show you some of the offshore islands here, and hopefully you'll be able to see the colors. I don't know what your color resolution is.
Well, it looks pretty good. That was a super shot of Florida.
Okay, we're coming up now on some of the offshore islands, and they have a very aqua blue-green coloring on their leeward side. And you can see the way the clouds change between the windward and leeward sides. And the colors of the water are also quite distinct here. Okay, looking back at the horizon there, how much more time do you have in this pass, Mercer?
We have about 6 minutes.
6 minutes, okay. Let me duck inside and just give you a cook's tour while we're here. That's all right?
Okay, we have 3 minutes of TV coverage, 6 minutes total.
Okay, good. Henry, hop in.
This is Shuttle Control. Bermuda has lost a signal with Columbia. During this pass over Mila, Ken Mattingly gave us a live television tour of the Gulf Coast and of Florida and of the flight and mid-decks of the orbiter Columbia. Next acquisition through the Dakar in 2.5 minutes. At 2 days, 22 hours, 57 minutes mission elapsed time. This is Shuttle Control, Houston.
CBS News, this is Dallas Townsend. Columbia, things are going well. This morning, the astronauts tested Columbia's navigational and thermal systems, and they finally started up an experiment devised by 9 students from Utah State University. It's intended to determine the biological and physical effects of weightlessness on various plants, animals, and minerals. Now this.
CBS News, this is Frank Sittapeni. Lebanese leaders say the PLO has included an unscheduled television show and a number of other activities. We get a report from Reed Collins at the Johnson Space Center.
Things are looking up for the space shuttle. They got the students' experiment package working this morning after 2 days of frustration. And by flying Columbia past the sun for a long time, Mission Control is confident that the water absorbed by the tiles during the Saturday night downpour at the launch site has been baked out. Flight Director Harold Braun pronounced the spacecraft dry today.
The water problem has been removed. They've got thermocouples that tell them how the temperatures of the tiles respond at various depths as they come into sunlight, and that data is indicating that we have gotten the water out.
Had the water remained in the tiles, it was feared the heat of re-entry might peel them off with potentially disastrous results. Reed Collins, CBS News at the Johnson Space Center.
Houston and the Gulf Coast. A former weather station turned out of his North Houston apartment. Today, the space agency is planning to ignore time. We get an explanation from KTRH's Wayne Dolcefino at the Johnson Space Center.
The Earth turns slower all the time, and to make up for that, the Bureau of Standards adjusts the world's clocks up 1 second about every 6 months. Today is the day for the leap second, and while tracking stations will make the change, Mission Control won't. Flight boss Harold Braun explains it's more of a problem than you might think.
All of a sudden, the radar data, the time tag of each tracking station comes in here has an aspect of error, and that doesn't sound like a whole lot. But it really does amount to a sizable error.
So NASA will ignore time. The space agency didn't ignore the problem with the Getaway Special experiment. The crew performed a hot wire on the project, and now it's back on, saving experiments which could provide a help in the long space travel time. I'm Wayne Dolcefino, live at the Johnson Space Center, KTRH News.
The city of Houston.
CBS News, I'm Stephanie Shelton. Have run into a new problem. One of the Columbia's cargo bay doors won't latch. Christopher Glenn reports from Houston.
The problem seems similar to one experienced on the last shuttle flight, improper latching of the payload bay doors after they've been on the cold shadow side of the ship for a long period. The astronauts have been taking TV pictures of the glitch, being careful to avoid showing any of the secret military experiment in the cargo bay. Ground Control asked Commander Mattingly to try to pinpoint when they first noticed the condition.
We just looked at each other and said, uh-oh, at the time you came up and called us because I said I wanted to wait for some daylight. You can pin it down. That's as close as I can get it in a time history.
At this point, there doesn't seem to be much concern. The astronauts are going about other tasks while the ground experts try to figure out a procedure. When the similar problem occurred on the last flight, they just turned the payload bay side of Columbia toward the sun for a few hours, thawed out the latches, and they worked fine. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
From ABC News, I'm Bill Deal. Near the halfway mark of its mission today, one of the doors to the shuttle's cargo bay warped during a routine thermal test. But the flight commander, Ken Mattingly, reported a short while later the problem disappeared when the door was opened.
Space, KTRH Center.
The shuttle's rear payload bay doors will warp. They won't properly close. This afternoon, astronauts Ken Mattingly and Hank Hartsfield will routinely perform the closing of those doors, but they wouldn't line up to latch. So they decided to reopen them. That's when people noticed another odd phenomenon.
We just opened the door. We opened it about 30 degrees. As soon as the door started to really big jump like it did on the top of the back hill or something.
Has been turned toward the sun for about 2 hours now, and that's been done to drop the wet tiles on the bottom. The doors were turned away from the sun. They've been to cause the warping. So this afternoon, NASA decided to let Columbia roll barbecue style to even its exposure to the sun. Now, the same problem cropped up during the last shuttle. The solution solved the problem back then, and NASA's hoping that solution will work once again on this, the fourth flight of the Space Shuttle Columbia. Live from Johnson Space Center, this is Doug Miller, KTRH News.
CBS News, this is David Jackson. To unstick a sticky latch aboard the shuttle Columbia, we get details from Christopher Glenn at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
Another try at closing Columbia's massive payload bay doors will be made tomorrow after a night of what the experts on the ground call thermal conditioning to try to thaw out an apparently frozen latch. Mattingly wanted to be sure they knew exactly what the problem is.
Did you get my comment about verifying that the doors close physically and that without any problem, that it looked like it was the latch mechanism that caused our problem?
All right, we copied that comment, TK.
Okay, I'm ready to copy now.
The instructions the controllers then sent up have already been initiated. Instead of spending the night with its bottom to the sun as scheduled, Columbia will slowly turn like a hot dog on a spit, trying to get the surface temperatures even all around. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston. Fourth day on orbit began with a small triumph. The crew managed to hot wire around a broken circuit and successfully activate a canister full of Utah State student experiments after 2 days of frustration. Gil Moore, the student's sponsor, was delighted.
We're elated. We feel that this is another typical example, routine example of NASA brilliance. We figure that they've really done the job again. And to be honest with you, I didn't think it was going to turn on, but it did.
Then Mission Control announced that a night with its bottom toward the sun had successfully dried out any water which may have lingered on Columbia's bottom side following a pre-launch hailstorm at the Cape. Flight Director Harold Drawn, coming off shift, said,
This flight is the most benign as far as the system's performance of any of the shuttle flights to date. We don't have any significant problems to work on in the control center.
But just a few hours later, Columbia Commander Mattingly reported,
We just looked at each other and said, uh-oh.
During a routine test closing of the big payload bay doors, one of the latches didn't latch. Ground experts said the latch could have been too long in the shadow and have frozen. There was a similar problem on the last flight, so they planned to slowly roll the ship as if on a barbecue spit to try to even out the temperatures all around. Another try at closing and latching the doors probably will be made tomorrow. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
CBS News, this is Rob Armstrong.
Astronauts Mattingly and Hartsfield. Christopher Glenn reports from Houston.
The day, which began with flight controllers calling Columbia's fourth mission the most trouble-free of them all, wound up with trouble still unresolved. The crew went to bed with their spacecraft slowly turning around and around, trying to get the sun to warm up all parts of it evenly. The unresolved problem is a latch that wouldn't do its job properly during a test closing of the big payload bay doors. They think it's frozen. The hecticness of the last few hours of troubleshooting before bedtime came through in the final air-ground conversation of the day.
Guys, we really appreciate your patience with us today. Things got pretty hectic, and you guys really hung in there.
Sure appreciate you watching the store for us. You've helped us out a lot today. At least, Mike, we may not have solved all of our problems, but we thought about them all in advance.
Tomorrow, when the sun has done its work, they'll close the doors again, hoping the latch has come unstuck. There was a similar problem on the last flight, and a similar thawing procedure worked just fine. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.